Hey friends, here with a very special guest. His name is Gary Rose. He is the VP of New Nuclear Growth at Ontario Power Generation. And today we're going to be talking about everything to do with Gary's experiences here at Ontario Power Generation. It's actually his 35th anniversary here in the organization. And also we're going to deep dive into some of the great initiatives that he's leading in the nuclear energy industry. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to share as much information as I can about my career and what's happening in new nuclear.
Yeah, excited for this convo. And so Gary, why don't we start off with, tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what does nuclear mean to you?
So I'm, as you said, Gary Rose, Vice President of New Nuclear Growth, which means my role at Ontario Power Generation is I'm accountable for nuclear expansion in Ontario beyond the Darlington New Nuclear Project. So the Darlington New Nuclear Project is being led by Dragan Popovich within the Enterprise Projects Organization. My role is now to look where else do we want to deploy nuclear in Ontario and what does that look like, what strategies are we deploying, what types of technology, et cetera. And I'll get into some of that details through your questions. Been with OPG for 35 years. I have 3 university level boys at this point, married, live in Whitby. I'm active in my community. I'm chair of the board at Durham College, which is something I really enjoy.
So maybe tell us a little bit about your 35 years, right, contributing to this industry. And I'd love to know the whole stages of your career and how you got started in this organization and where it led up to now where you're leading the strategic growth of small modular reactors, new nuclear. So would love to know more about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. In fact, I tell the story as often as I can because I think there's some good messages in it. I started at Ontario Power Generation, actually Ontario Hydro, in 1988. I was 18 years old. I had completed 2 semesters of food and beverage management at Durham College, which is kind of interesting now that I'm the chairman of the board at Durham College, but that's a different story. So 2 semesters of food and beverage management and realized that that's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. Ended up applying to a job and got a job at Ontario Hydro, in essence, as a clerk typist. I worked 2 days a week doing administrative work, filing, and 3 days a week basically in a mailroom packing up brochures for our energy management division. I started there in '88. I enjoyed those times in energy management, and it's interesting because I started my career off in energy management, where the focus was about using less electricity, so we didn't need to build new nuclear. And now where I am 35 years later in a role where it's all about building new nuclear. So it's not lost on me how that 35-year cycle has happened. So anyway, I was in energy management. After about 5 years in energy management in different roles and different capacities, OPG, or Ontario Hydro, so I keep mixing up Ontario Hydro, OPG. Ontario Hydro decided that we didn't need to be in this energy efficiency as heavy as we once thought we needed to be. A bunch of reports at the time had some incorrect projections of what the future energy demands were going to be. And I ended up out of a job. I was declared surplus back in that time. I was, for those that have been around Ontario Hydro for a while, I was what they call a grade 62, which is basically a band 3 PWU employee, and was told I didn't have a job. So we all, like most folks that did at that time, there used to be a package of vacancies that would come out every week, and we would go through them and apply to dozens of jobs, hopefully with something that was of interest. Long story short, I ended up in corporate finance and thought that, you know what, I'm 23-ish at that point in time, really didn't have a lot of education. Maybe it's time I go back to school, get some education to support that role that I was now in corporate finance. And quite honestly, I knew nothing about finance. I was a food and beverage management graduate, or not even that. I dropped out of food and beverage management program. So I went back to school. I did my Bachelor of Commerce, did my certified general accountant, which is now a CPA, certified public accountant, and worked in finance, grew up in finance. I shifted through that, while I was doing that education, I moved from clerical roles to analyst, financial analyst type roles, and then eventually to the manager of the department that I actually went to when I was declared surplus. And And that was fun. So over a few years, progressed quite well in the organization and management. And in the late 90s, this thing called Y2K was about to happen. And there was this fear that all of our IT systems at midnight on December 31st, 1999 would stop operating. And we started to go through this process of replacing these old VAX mainframe systems to solve this problem. So I was a business process owner, but it was actually my first foray into project management, which was really interesting to me. And as I was going through that process, I went back to school. In fact, I went back to Durham College and got my project management professional designation, a master's of project management from Durham College. And I did a number of financial related projects in the late 90s, including, some people love this, some people hate it, but I led the project to deploy Concur, our corporate business expense system.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was in 1999. Everybody was worried about Y2K. I was asked to lead this team to replace the business expense system. I had a great team working with that. We selected the Concur technology. I was told that we were trying to do something that would take us over the next couple of years until SAP was ready and we would transfer to SAP. Almost 24 years later, that tool, love it or hate it, is still operating and we still use it at OPG. But in that time, it was the first web-based, fully outsourced system OPG had ever deployed. So that was my late 90s. I was transitioning from being a financial analyst type financial manager, had my commerce and my CPA designation into project management. Early 2000s, did some re-engineering projects in corporate finance, including centralization of all the accounts payable processes. We went from 19 accounts payable centers down to one. We partnered with a company where all the invoices were sent to that company, scanned, and then integrated in through workflow and through our systems. You gotta remember, this is 20 plus years ago. So we were very technologically advanced there, and many of those processes are still in place today. 2002, I had an opportunity to transition to nuclear, to the Pickering A return to service project, where I was still in finance, but really doing project controls. I learned about this thing called earned value management, and it really changed my career for the next 20 years. In fact, I think it's changed my outlook on things. I learned all about earned value management. I understand the value of understanding how much did things cost for how much work. It wasn't like finance where I had a budget and I spent it. This was really about, I did 10 widgets and therefore I earned a certain amount of my budget and how much did it cost, and I could do CPI or cost performance index or schedule performance index SPI, so linking that to the schedule. And that really set me up onto this focus on project controls. Through the Unit 1 RTS, we developed a lot of methodology for project management. When we decided not to proceed with restarting units 2 to 3 at Pickering, I shifted and worked for product modifications in a project called CSUP, Cost and Schedule Improvement Project, where we endeavored to put in a number of systems to basically improve our timeliness of cost reporting. What was happening is we would find out that we were overspent on a job when the invoice came in. We needed to shift that energy to understanding where we were supposed to be this week and where we were at. So we did a number of things, a number of system improvements to really get much closer to real-time data. And that focus shifted, in 2006, there was an announcement from OPG's CEO at the time that the province had directed OPG to consider the decision to refurbish Pickering and Darlington, to evaluate that decision. I sent an email to my boss at the time, Jim Beach, said, Jim, I want to be a part of this project. And nothing happened. About a year later, Jim called me and said, I want to introduce you to someone. He introduced me to Pat McNeil. A week later, I was working for the what they called Plant Life Extension Program at that time. And that was about late 2007. I had an opportunity then to work for Pat in evaluating our decision to proceed to refurbish Pickering or not, as well as Darlington. And I also worked for the Darlington New Build project at that point in time. So I was basically financially supporting both those projects. Of course, we all know that at that time the Darlington New Nuclear project didn't proceed. We made the decision not to proceed with Pickering at that point in time based on economics then. But we made a decision to proceed with Darlington. So I shifted over to project planning for the Darlington Refurbishment program. I spent the next, close to 7 years leading the planning effort for the Darlington Refurbishment project. And my team developed the $12.8 billion estimate that is the Darlington Refurbishment program. We developed all the processes, the techniques, the systems, et cetera, to do project management well. And we tested many of those in the early days of refurbishment, which have been deployed in Unit 2. And quite frankly, I think they're a big part of the reason why Darlington Refurbishment is ahead of schedule and on budget, is because we plan the job well and we set up the tools to monitor, to monitor and understand where we were supposed to be and where we actually are on a shift-by-shift basis through excellent planning, but meticulous focus on execution and understanding where we are at. And if you're off track, doing something about it. There's no point in having these systems if you don't use that information to do something. So I'm in refurbishment. I was here in this room when we launched Unit 2 in October 2016. I was still the Vice President of Planning and Project Controls at that point. I, with Dietmar Reiner, represented the Darlington Refurbishment program in front of the Ontario Energy Board, which approved $4.8 billion in rate base based on a successful Unit 2. About midway through Unit 2, I transitioned from the role of VP Project Planning and Project Controls to the Deputy Vice President, working under Mike Allen, executing Unit 2, which was a fantastic learning experience to be able to come into the site every day, go down to the field and interface with the trade staff and the quality control folks, the people that really make these projects happen, and understand from them what it takes to execute this type of a project and look for ways to help them and make it more successful and better. Was a really, really great time. I signed the in-service declaration of Unit 2 for January 4th, 2020. So it's probably the highlight of my career. I'll look back, and it probably was a good year after that. Every morning I would wake up and I would check to make sure Unit 2 was still online. And of course, it was. We had some challenges on Unit 2, but proud to say it got in service. It operated very well from a quality perspective. We had a huge amount of lessons learned from Unit 2 that were packaged up and passed forward to Unit 3, 1, and 4. And it's a big part of why Unit 3, 1, and 4, or Unit 3 and halfway through Unit 1 and Unit 4 to come, while why it is that our performance is so much better. We planned well, we understood where we had opportunities to do better, and we implemented those opportunities. And under Subo and the team that's executing refurbishment, they're doing a fantastic job. It's very important for us to deliver the Darlington refurbishment on time and on budget, because quite frankly, if we didn't, I don't know that we would be having this conversation today about new nuclear. So in late 2020, I had an opportunity to transition from the refurbishment program to work with Robin Manley and help them complete the planning to obtain approval to proceed with the DNMP project. So that got approval in November of 2021. And I transitioned from helping Robin. Dragan Popovic came in to execute the project. Now that we had sanctioned the project, it moved over to Enterprise Projects Organization. Dragan Popovic is leading, and my role shifted down to new nuclear growth, which was to really look at, as I said earlier, what are the opportunities to deploy more nuclear in Ontario. But also in my role, I do a lot of work helping other provinces. I sit on the Pan-Canadian, SMR Pan-Canadian team with representatives from New Brunswick, from Saskatchewan, from Alberta. We are working together as a collective to resolve policy-related issues. We are working with Saskatchewan to potentially help them in deploying their reactors. And I also get an opportunity to work with Laurentis Energy Partners and talk about what we're doing here globally. I had an opportunity last fall to go to Europe with Minister Smith and his team and meet with folks in the Czech Republic, in Poland, in Estonia, to talk about what we were doing here. And in fact, through Laurentis Energy Partners, we have a master services agreement and are doing work in Poland and have an MSA for Estonia, Fermi Energia in Estonia. We have delegations that come to the deck, the Darlington Energy Complex, to talk to us about what we're doing, including today. We had a delegation from Japan. We've had delegations from UAE, from Australia, from France, from Malaysia, North America, you name it. I kind of jokingly refer to this as the nuclear's #1 tourist destination these days. There's a lot of countries around the world that are noticing what we were doing here and coming to learn from us. So anyway, that's a long story to tell you where I've been. I started off in a clerical role, and I had a huge opportunity to progress through different roles in the organization. And the message that I would want new people coming to OPG to get from that is you can be anything you want to be at OPG. You've just got to figure out what that is. What do you want to do? And plan for it. Go after it. Don't wait for somebody to bring it to you. Understand what that role requires. Go educate yourself. Do stuff on your own time. Learn. Knowledge is yours and nobody will ever take it away from you. And go after those opportunities.
Definitely. I love that motivation, and what a legacy, right? Like what a legacy you've led, and really appreciate wrapping that legacy in a nutshell, right? And progressively showing your career path, leading these major nuclear successes for the entire industry here. And I think one thing that I want to ask you about is the importance of nuclear finance, right? We see projects across the world, and a lot of critics in the nuclear, outside of the nuclear space, say that nuclear is too expensive. Right. So what's the importance of strategically planning the finance behind these projects, like rate of return, the investment, the supply chain? So can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start off with a simpler message than that. You know, it's a little bit of, planning doesn't guarantee success, but lack of planning guarantees failure. Mm-hmm. And, if you're unsuccessful on your project, the likelihood of you being able to do that many more times is going to be a challenge. So when it comes to nuclear, we have to demonstrate that we can be successful. We think about refurbishment. If we didn't do a great job on Unit 2, I'm not certain that we would have had the opportunity to refurbish the next 3 units. And I look at where we are with new build, the DNMP project. The world is watching what we're doing, but if we can't deliver, and there's going to be challenges. I mean, it's early. Will we be right on budget? Will we be right on schedule for the first of a kind project? That's going to be challenging, but that is we've got to set ourselves up to be able to do that, and that means doing all the planning. It means making sure your design is done before you start construction. It means taking a lot of time to understand your risks and develop and put them on the shelf mitigation strategies if those risks occur, that you can go and do something about them, right? And it's too often I see projects where the risks are thought about at the business time in the business case, they're put on a shelf, and when reality happens, which they will, and projects are risky, risks will occur, they're forgotten about. So, I think that planning, taking the time on the business case to understand the costs, obviously you're going to look at the costs from a CapEx perspective, from a operating perspective. You're going to do an analysis to understand what the cost of energy could be. You're going to compare that elsewhere. At the end of the day, these projects, these nuclear projects are expensive in terms of billions of dollars to deploy these units. But once they're deployed, if they're deployed successfully, they operate, seamlessly, 24/7, day in, day out, for 60 to 80 years. So it is a big upfront investment. If you think about projects that haven't been successful, unfortunately, there's a lot of them. In fact, quite honestly, mega projects in general are not successful. I think the the statistics indicate that 90+% of mega projects fail in terms of cost and schedule. This is not a nuclear project. Mega projects are complicated. There's a lot of parts. There's a lot of people. You got to recognize that, and you got to plan for that, and you got to build risk and contingencies in to deal with those types of projects. If you look at Vogtle in the U.S., there's a lot to be said about Vogtle. It started off with an original estimate of, I believe, about $14 billion US, and it's landing at $34 billion US, I believe. They had a lot of challenges. They were the first Westinghouse technology to be regulated in the States. They were the first to believe this combined licensing where you had to have all the design and the licensing and everything approved in advance. They learned a lot. Westinghouse, of course, went bankrupt in the middle of that process. They shifted from a lump sum to in essence, a time and material contract. Huge amount of challenges that were given to them. Their product is now coming online. Lots of excitement. It's expensive, there's no question about it. We need to learn from that to make the next projects cheaper, but it's going to provide 80 years of carbon-free power. And although it costs more than originally planned, there's still a lot of value in having that nuclear project to provide carbon-free power, 24/7 baseload power. The point being is that Vogtle was more expensive, but it will still provide clean baseload power for a long period of time. We have an opportunity to learn from the successes of projects like Darlington Refurbishment. We'll learn from the challenges that Vogtle had, and we need to apply those to these projects that we're doing here in Canada or anywhere elsewhere in the world. And hopefully that gives you answers the question, but I think that we need to focus on planning. We got to recognize these projects are complex. They will have risks and issues. We need to think about that in advance. And the worst thing we could do is to tell the world that we're gonna deliver a project for a budget and a timeline that is not achievable. You're just setting yourselves up for another failure, and that impacts the industry as a whole. It's another mark on the industry. We need to take the time to plan these projects well and execute them to those plans, and I think that'll help our image of being too expensive.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much for going through some examples of projects like Vogtle or even mega projects in general, right? And giving us a greater understanding of the fact that mega projects themselves are expensive, right? Another question I have for you is, you talked about how a lot of countries are coming to Canada to recognize and learn about the expertise and experience that we have. What are some of the top questions that they usually ask you and get guidance, or what do they want to know more about?
Why? It starts with why. Why are you deploying in SMRs? Why aren't you deploying large nuclear? Why aren't you deploying CANDU? That's the knowledge that you have. So it's a lot of education. We've had delegations from Australia here. We've had 2 delegations from Australia here over the last 6 months who are really learning. They are truly. I don't think nuclear is outlawed in Australia. It's not a part of their. They're not allowed to develop nuclear. I don't know how else to say it than that. But they are learning. They're trying to figure out how do they decarbonize their environment, and nuclear is the clearest option to them. So we get a lot of questions as to why SMRs. Tell us about SMRs. What are the different types of SMRs that you considered? What were some of the thoughts when you evaluated the SMRs that you did? When you talk with countries like Australia or more specifically Poland or Estonia, the folks from those countries, they don't have nuclear right now. So they want to understand what are all the things they need to do.
So tell us a little bit about the decarbonization report that came out from IESO, and what does that mean for new nuclear growth in Canada?
So the Independent Electricity System Operator, or IESO, as you called it, report called Pathways to Decarbonization was issued in December. It's a scenario of what the energy demands could be in a net zero scenario by 2050 for Ontario. And it calls out, subject to check, my numbers may not be exactly right, but it's calling out 17.8 or 17,800 megawatts of new nuclear, almost 18 gigawatts of new nuclear. We currently have just under 13 gigawatts of nuclear, baseload nuclear at Pickering, Darlington, and Bruce Power. So more than doubling of our nuclear fleet to achieve that scenario, which is basically total decarbonization, electrification of transportation, residential heating, and large industry, right? So one could argue, is 18 the right number? Don't know, really don't care. It's a lot, is what I care about. It is much more than one BWRX at Darlington, or 4 BWRXs at Darlington, which is our plan. It's going to require a substantial amount of new nuclear over the next 15 to 30 years to achieve these goals.
So in terms of small modular reactor deployment versus large nuclear deployment, what are your thoughts on the future of that, and in terms of the strategy behind SMR versus large nuclear?
So maybe break that down a little bit for you. We've obviously made the decision to proceed with SMRs at Darlington, and our goal was to deploy the first SMR at Darlington by 2028, 2029. Our target is the construction complete by 2028, in service by 2029, because we need electricity. We need some electricity at the end of this decade. We need a lot more electricity in this decarbonization scenario at the end of the 2030s. So as you close in on 2040, you need a substantial step up of additional energy. So we decided to move forward with SMRs at Darlington. One, because we had a licensed site. Two, we had energy needs by 2030s. We also wanted to take advantage of being an early entry into the market. Our BWRX project is a first of a kind. It gives us an opportunity to demonstrate that we can deploy new nuclear projects. We've demonstrated that we can refurbish nuclear, but it's been a long time since we built new nuclear plants. So, a little bit of walk before you run mentality, if I use that analogy. Let's get the industry focused on deploying one SMR at Darlington, potentially 3 more SMRs at Darlington by the middle of the 2030s. And parallel to that, think about what else are we doing. So what else? So if 18 gigawatts is the right number, our plan is to deploy up to 4 at Darlington. I'm still 16 plus gigawatts short. I look at the future of nuclear in Ontario from a centralized perspective and a decentralized perspective. And maybe this is not official terminology, but it's the way I like to think about it. When I think about centralized nuclear, it's the traditional way we've deployed nuclear. We've got big centralized plants at Darlington, Pickering, and Bruce Power. Those centralized plants produce large amounts of power and are distributed through a high voltage network, mainly across southern Ontario. We need, in order to achieve those, that remaining 16 gigawatts or more, we need to look for deploying more nuclear along the southern parts of Ontario, where we can provide electricity to those high voltage grids for distribution of electricity in the traditional centralized way. There are not a lot of land opportunities to deploy nuclear. And for the land that we have, we want to maximize the amount of nuclear capacity that can come off of those sites. So your question about SMRs versus large, I think in the south, in the centralized way, I think large nuclear is going to be needed. Not certain of that yet, but if the financials are good and the schedules are good and we have the right technology and the right licensable technology, and I think we'll conclude that we do have all those things, I'm very optimistic that we will be deploying large nuclear in southern Ontario. It's Gary Rose's opinion. Lots of socialization of that with Government of Ontario and OPG or Board of Directors, et cetera, to make sure that is the right way to go. But if we can de-risk large nuclear projects, which is a lot easier said than done, I believe large nuclear projects have a future role in Ontario.
Interesting.
And that's just from the centralized grid perspective, right? For electricity. So what about this SMR program that we talked about? This, so we're deploying them at Darlington. I see more grid scale SMRs like the BWRX in perhaps Western Ontario, right? Maybe out Lambton in Sarnia, or Eastern Ontario in places like in the Ottawa Valley. I don't know where exactly. I don't want people to run off and think that we're building new nuclear in the Ottawa Valley, but Eastern Canada, we have sites. We have a plant at Lennox. We have other sites in Eastern Ontario that I think where you don't need to have that large distribution electricity. I think SMRs make sense. Grid scale SMRs, maybe in Central North Ontario. Places where you need electricity, but you don't have a big grid to go there. So we're talking now about grid scale large nuclear in the centralized south on the high voltage lines. Distribution electricity, we've talked about maybe decentralized grid scale SMRs beyond Darlington, at perhaps in the mid-north, east-west, maybe Atikokan and places like that could be good. Those 300 megawatts units are, Saskatchewan is also going to deploy that technology. They're looking to potentially replace coal plants with this technology on existing grid lines, right? So, and they don't need, at this point anyway, they don't need gigawatt class reactors. They don't need that amount of power. And if they did, they'd need one or two, and then they're putting all their eggs in one basket. So SMRs are really suitable for provinces that don't have the same high-level energy needs that we do in Ontario. Or provinces or countries, and I'll get to that in a little bit, that are removing coal plants, have existing grid lines that are 300 to 600 watts of capacity, and can put an SMR there. Perfect opportunity for SMRs. Saskatchewan's following OPG's lead. TVA is following OPG's lead. Synthos Green Energy out of Poland is following OPG's lead, deploying SMRs in their coal sites. Fermi Energy in Estonia just announced that they're going to also deploy this GE BWRX technology. All learnings from what we were doing here in Ontario. And all of those, we're working with all of those jurisdictions to help to ensure that they are successful. So that's grid scale, large grid scale SMRs at Darlington, large grid scale nuclear plants, and perhaps grid scale SMRs distributed throughout. But there are other applications for SMRs we haven't talked about yet, industrial applications. So OPG's partnered with X Energy, and our goal is to deploy X Energy where its primary purpose is to provide steam, heat, to replace combined cycle gas turbines that are operating in industrial applications to provide steam or heat for whatever industrial process is needed. And I hear stories like some of these industries, large mines in the north where they're going through 10,000 gallons of diesel a week to operate turbines to be able to bring steam and heat to their industrial processes. I see X Energy or high temperature reactors, whether they are X Energy is a high temperature gas reactor, helium cooled reactor, but there are other high temperature reactors. New Brunswick is working with Vents Reactor Concepts, ARC reactor. There's Moltex, which is looking for in the future. There are other technologies out here, but OPG is working with X Energy with the goal to decarbonize industry. You will not achieve net zero without decarbonizing industry. And the beauty of that is if you could deploy those technologies in a cogeneration setting, and by the way, they're helium cooled, so they can go just about anywhere. They don't need large bodies of water like the other larger grid-scaled reactors do. They're helium-cooled, installed in an industry in a cogeneration type setting where the primary purpose is to provide steam or heat, perhaps some electricity to those industrial users. And when they don't need that steam or heat or electricity, maybe we can then put the power on the grid for other consumers. So it gives us an opportunity to, again, I use that word decentralize and deploy nuclear in a decentralized way, in a different way than we've used to. Now, the last stream for nuclear in Ontario, in some respects, to me, this is the most exciting one. Is the opportunity to deploy micro-modular reactors to remote communities, to decarbonize remote communities, and or smaller mines or smaller industries, even community settings. So OPG has a partnership with Global First Power, a joint venture called Global First Power. It's actually a joint venture between OPG and ultra-safe nuclear company called Global First Power. Their offices are in Whitby, just west of here, which is kind of neat. And they are going to deploy their first full-scale demonstration project at Chalk River by 2027 and demonstrate that a 5 megawatt micro-modular reactor, 5 megawatt electricity, 50 megawatt thermal can be deployed and can provide electricity to a community setting, community hub setting. Think about the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories or the old AECL site, Chalk River site, and electricity and steam for heating of that site by 2027, not that far away. And the opportunity for that type of reactor is to replace diesel engines in remote communities in the north, to provide electricity, but also the USNC reactor is also a helium-cooled reactor. It's a different fuel form, but it's a helium-cooled reactor, so it's not dependent on large volumes of water. We refer to it as a nuclear battery. The whole idea is that you will fuel it, and it will operate without refueling for up to 20 years. So you can take this very modular small reactor and deploy it in a remote community with very little operations, and it can provide electricity, steam for heating, residential heating. But this is what gets me excited. Heat for agricultural, for greenhouse, so food security, but also heat, steam for water desalination. So think about a remote community that you can solve electricity, heat, food, water. I mean, it seems utopian, but it's not that far away from reality. And that really excites me. So I think nuclear, are the traditional way that we think about it is providing electricity is great. We're going to need lots of that in order to electrify Ontario and decarbonize Ontario ahead in order to achieve net zero by 2050. But to provide steam for industry and to provide steam and heat for remote communities as well is really an exciting and a new way to deploy nuclear.
Absolutely, yeah, super exciting, and I really appreciate the two categories, right? Decentralized versus centralized, large nuclear, small nuclear, and then micro. And then also painting a map. I love the map analogy that you gave of Ontario and potentially where certain sites would be suitable. Tell us about, I know you were telling us a little bit about countries and how they are approaching OPG and Canada and looking up to us as a leader. In terms of us being the first to deploy this small modular reactor technology, how are we developing agreements with other countries where information sharing will take place? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Osama, you are right. We are the first to deploy the BWRX 300 technology anywhere in the world. We will be the first. And as I said earlier, Saskatchewan, Tennessee Valley Authority in the U.S., Synthos Green Energy in Poland, Fermi Energy in Estonia have all stated publicly that they're deploying this reactor as well after us. So they will learn from our experience. And but our partnership with, as each of these countries are thinking about, countries or provinces are thinking about deploying the BWRX, we, for example, are working with TVA in the States. So TVA already has boiling water reactors. So we have an opportunity to learn from them. In fact, Dragan Popovich and his team have had people go down to TVA and participate in their outage training or on outages and learn about that technology. So that partnership is important. Meanwhile, TVA will learn from us on what were the challenges in deploying the BWRX and how can they learn from that and make their project more successful. So there's a great two-way collaboration opportunity there. When it comes to Saskatchewan, they've never deployed nuclear technology. It's new to them. The nice thing is they got the same regulator, and so we have a standard design, same regulator. We can leverage existing supply chains to the extent that it makes sense from Ontario. And we can work with, OPG will work with Saskatchewan to help them set up their nuclear program, potentially help them deploy the BWRX technology, and perhaps work with them even in an operating capacity once their reactor is deployed. So we have 50 plus years of nuclear expertise. OPG's been recognized by WANO as top tier nuclear operator for years. I've lost track of how many years it seems like it's been quite a while now. So, the operations team under Steve Gregoris at OPG have certainly deserved some high recognition for their capability, and we can share that with. It's a different technology than we're used to, but nuclear safety culture and all the things that come with that, I think, are very transferable to Saskatchewan. Once we deploy our BWRX here, it even becomes more important for Saskatchewan. Synthos Green Energy in Poland. So through Laurentis Energy Partners, who's already doing work in Romania, they have a master services agreement with Synthos Green Energy to help them. They are, again, nuclear. They're not a nuclear jurisdiction, so they have an agreement now with the CNSC to help them establish a regulatory framework. Again, common design, consistent regulatory framework makes the deployment of these reactors in Poland a lot easier. So Laurentis Energy Partners is there's a number of different scopes of work that we're undertaking with Synthos Green Energy right now, including help them to understand what's needed from a managed system for nuclear. What about schedules? What does it take? What are all the steps that are needed to get these projects launched? And meanwhile, Poland is evaluating all their sites and figuring out exactly where they would put these reactors. So really, there's a lot of good synergy and opportunity, and a lot of opportunity to share our knowledge to Synthos Green Energy and help Poland decarbonize. Huge opportunity in Poland to deploy nuclear. So that's a huge amount, and that doesn't even deal with potential growth and additional electrification. They have a huge district heating program over there. So, I think Poland will look at both large and SMRs as well. As I talked about earlier, SMRs to replace existing coal sites, and large for centralized, grid scale distribution of electricity. And perhaps they'll look at advanced reactors as well for district heating and other applications. We're working with Fermi Energy in Estonia through a master services agreement with Laurentis, and like I said, we have got a number of other countries that are having conversations. I think if they select the BWRX technology, it obviously creates some natural synergies for us to work with these other countries, if it makes sense, and it's got to make commercial sense. We are. This is a business, right? As much as it excites me to help these other countries deploy nuclear, we are owned by the ratepayers of Ontario, so there's got to be value that we bring back to Ontario, and I think the value is just through our services and our knowledge. There's some political, some value to Canada from a political standpoint, but ultimately it creates opportunities for our supply chain to export manufactured goods. So again, if Poland wants to deploy reactors in 2030, 2031, the fastest way to deploy that is to leverage our standard design, leverage our regulatory framework to the extent that it makes sense, and our vendors that have already deployed the same goods for our reactor here at Darlington.
In terms of BWR, what about countries like Japan or countries which have extensive experience in BWR deployment? Are we tapping into that resource as well?
I don't have a great answer for you. I don't know what Japan's plans are. Of course, Japan is in the process of restarting many of their nuclear reactors. They are a small, densely populated, country, right? When you think about the southern Ontario, the sliver along Lake Ontario, and think about Japan, it's kind of similar, right? Where you got a lot of large nuclear providing large amounts of energy for that local, those energy needs. There was representatives from Japan. There's been a couple different industry representatives from Japan. In fact, this morning I had a delegation from Japan here that are, again, trying to understand why SMRs. This was the question today. Why are you deploying SMRs? Why not large nuclear? What's the value proposition for small modular reactors? And we gave the message. There are jurisdictions that don't need large amounts of reactors, large amounts of energy. The whole concept of small modular reactor and simpler reactors is that they're smaller, cheaper to build, don't have as long of a deployment cycle, become a little bit more investable because of that, become very attractive to countries that don't need 1,000, 2,000 megawatts, that need 600 megawatts and can replace coal. So we talked through that. What will they proceed with SMRs? I don't know. I think they're so focused on restarting their existing fleet and figuring out how to renew that fleet. We certainly had conversations about public acceptance of nuclear here, especially following Fukushima. It was really interesting to talk to them about Fukushima and the fact that Fukushima was a tragedy, but the tragedy was really the tsunami and the people having to relocate. The nuclear accident itself didn't kill anybody. There are certainly things to learn from that. We shared with them that when we go around and do a site tour, you'll see where we've enhanced our safety features in this facility and put Fukushima-related systems in place. So, we learn from them, and I think when it comes to Canada, we can demonstrate that we have an excellent safety record of deploying reactors, and we learn from Fukushima and make our reactors even more safe. And when we think about this new technology, the BWRX, they made safety enhancements in recognition of the fact that the incident at Fukushima was due to the fact that they lost electricity and therefore lost the ability to cool the reactor. The designs of these BWRX 300s have additional cooling so that they can cool the reactor for up to 7 days or more without operator interaction. When you start thinking about the advanced reactors like the helium-cooled reactors, they will shut down. If they overheat, they will automatically shut down. So there's been safety improvements to deal with some of the learnings from Fukushima to prevent recurrence. So that is an ongoing education to educate folks of those improvements. And
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Education is definitely important, and I think this is part of it, right? Like sharing these stories and lessons learned from your experiences, from your kind of day in the life and what you deal with day to day, and what are some of the challenges and what are some of the things that excite you when it comes to new nuclear?
Well, the excitement part's easy. I mean, everything excites me about this. If it doesn't convey it through even the camera here, I don't know what will. I'm certainly passionate about what we were doing here. I don't do anything halfway. I'm completely passionate. I think I'm fully engaged in what the potential of this program is, and the ability to provide clean energy to decarbonize Ontario. To help decarbonize. We're in a great spot in Ontario. We closed all our coal plants between 2005 and 2014. We're 93% clean in Ontario. I mean, you're probably too young for this, but I remember the announcements on the news about smog days where there's too much pollution in the air. If you have trouble breathing, don't go outside today. We don't have any of those anymore. That's largely due to our decision to close coal. And on the backs of nuclear, quite honestly, some renewables, but largely Bruce Power reopening units, Ontario Power running their units better and more improved, better capacity factors, etc. We've demonstrated that nuclear provides clean grid. We're 93% clean. Many jurisdictions throughout the world are years behind. They still are operating coal, like Poland. This provides a huge opportunity, and if you can't be passionate about that, the opportunity to help deal with climate change, to provide solutions to help meet net zero, provide solutions for my kids and their kids to have a better future, I mean, that's what gets me up every day. It's like the opportunity to do that. Are there challenges? There are absolutely challenges. We're far away from deploying the number of nuclear reactors that are needed to achieve that goal I just talked about, right? Often get asked, are we in a nuclear renaissance? We're on the verge of a nuclear renaissance, but we got a lot of work to do. There's a lot of challenges to, one, demonstrate these first-of-a-kind projects. We got to license those projects. We got to construct those projects. We got to prepare to operate those projects. We need to do it well, on time and on budget, to demonstrate that we can do this. First-of-a-kind projects are challenging. There's going to be challenges. There's tough work ahead. And then to do that 3 more times at Darlington, while Saskatchewan's also deploying it, while TVA's deploying it, and now we're talking about micromodular reactors, industrial reactors, more large-scale reactors. It's a huge, daunting challenge to have the human capacity, the supply chain ready to do all of this, right? But I think of the 20s are about getting ready for it. The 30s are going to be about making it happen. The 40s are going to be really about learning and optimizing that in order to achieve net 50. You can't wait till 2048 to start thinking about net zero by 2050. So we're on the verge of a nuclear renaissance. We have a lot of challenges, but we have a bit of time to get ready. But I always think about nuclear, especially when I was planning the Darlington Refurbishment. We were planning in 2008, 2009, and we were 5 years away from starting the refurbishment. And I used to refer to it as the day after tomorrow. And in nuclear speak, it takes a lot of effort to plan this stuff. So we need to be thinking about 2030s when we start to get into these projects and on scale. It's the day after tomorrow. We need to start thinking about, and we're doing some of this. What do we need from the supply chain? Where in Canada, can we be self-sufficient in Canada to provide all the critical materials that are needed, the fuel that is needed, the resources that are needed to make this happen? I spent a lot of my days, especially in my days from a pan-Canadian perspective. I've chaired a couple of workshops now with the CNA talking about this human capacity question, and with union leaders, with schools, with educators, talking about starting the program, starting to plan and think ahead for this. We got to be careful. The ramp up is going to go slow, and then it's going to go. And I don't want us to get a bunch of people ready that not have work, lose momentum. Yeah. Right. So it's a matter of timing it right. But there's a lot of work here, especially Darlington. We're still refurbishing DNMP. We're still finishing up the refurbishment of Darlington by 2026. Bruce is still refurbishing their assets, I believe, into close to 2030s or slightly beyond that. The potential to refurbish Pickering. So while all that's going on, we're still starting to think about building more. The good news is all those people that are coming from that refurbishment business, when that's all done, they have great opportunity. Yeah. There's a future. I mean, some days I wish I was 10 years younger because I think the next 20 years are just going to be so exciting. And for any of your younger listeners that are listening here and thinking about a career, whether you're an engineer or an accountant like me or a project manager, huge opportunity, right? Tradesperson. We cannot deliver these projects without trades. So if your son or daughter is interested in the trades, we need folks in the trades in order to deliver this nuclear infrastructure, in order to meet these clean energy goals. So we need all of the above, and I think there are careers ahead for people that are truly interested in this. Challenge is making sure we do these next few first-of-a-kind projects well, so that we don't lose the opportunity.
Absolutely, it's really inspiring to get a chance to have these conversations with leaders like yourself, because it just goes to show how important foundation that you're laying for those future decades, right? And I love the sequence of the decades that you just gave, that we have some time now, but the 2020s, 2030s, 2040s will lead up to something that we need to fulfill, right? Electricity, right? Electricity, we've had it, it's always been on, but now we need to deploy these reactors, and these reactors need to create that electricity reliably, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
You referenced the what I'm laying, right? You said, this infrastructure that I'm starting to lay out, these plans and these strategies. It always makes me nervous. There's a little bit about me when I say I'm doing this, because it's not just me. It's a team of people, right? I happen to be a leader who gets, I work in a company that has a great vision. I mean, I've been with OPG for 35 years. I cannot think of a better place to have spent my last 35 years, and great place to be right now. The vision that the OPG leadership team has in, everything from the EDI program that we have, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion program that we have, the Reconciliation Action Plan that we have, the Climate Change Plan that we have, the vision to look at nuclear need, to be able to give me the opportunity to communicate that need, and help generate these projects, help convey that vision to the teams of people, whether they work directly for me or indirectly. There are teams of people across this company that are, and quite frankly, across the nuclear industry in Ontario and Canada, that are all buying into this opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for the entire nuclear industry in Canada. And all of the people that have worked so hard at Darlington Refurbishment, at Bruce Power's refurbishment, to demonstrate and tell the world that we can actually make this happen, that we can deliver nuclear projects well, given us the credibility to have this conversation. If it wasn't for the successful refurbishments that we have had and the exceptional nuclear industry that we have in Ontario, we wouldn't be here. Right? So, yeah, I like the role that I'm in is fantastic. The opportunity to lead and have this conversation, but there's so many people with me. I get to be the voice at times, which is great, but it's a large group of 70,000 plus nuclear workers in Canada that are all making this happen by demonstrating day in, day out the value of nuclear and working on projects that are really setting us up for success.
Absolutely, and it's great that that they have leaders like yourself that are have that vision and have that clear goal in mind, right? What does leadership mean to you?
Leadership, it's a funny thing for me, and this is probably not what you're going to read in a book. My role as a leader is to enable others to do work, right? My job is to help set a vision, convey a vision. Often, I have leaders, I have bosses. We all get together, we have a vision, and I get to translate and communicate that vision down to the folks that make these projects happen. Leadership for me is about being empathetic. I love to roll up my sleeves. I love to understand what the challenges are. I love to work with the teams. I had the opportunity during Unit 2 refurbishment to go work on the lower feeder team in the field. And we were struggling. We did not plan that part of the work very well. We learned a lot of lessons from that. It's such a great experience to be out there and not telling people what to do, but asking them what they needed to be successful. So that's what, to me, when I think about leadership, it's enabling, setting a vision, sharing the vision, and understanding what it is that the folks that are executing that vision need. And if I can clear the way and help them be successful, I've done my job. I don't look at myself as being a leader. I look at myself as being a teammate. I like to be involved. Of course, someday you got to be the boss. Some days, right? You've got to lean in and you've got to set the vision. You've got to correct where things are at certain points in time. But we talk about facilitative leadership at OPG, and to me, it's who I am. I mean, it's all about relationships, working with people, communicating the value. And with that, you get a huge engagement, and you can stand back and watch it happen. That's what leadership is to me.
That's phenomenal. I really enjoyed this conversation, Gary. You learned so much, right? Especially about your career journey, about your vision for new nuclear deployment here at OPG, and also your personality as a leader, right? A facilitative leader who has that empathy and that drive to encourage your team and move things forward. So really, it's brilliant to learn about your successes in the refurb campaigns, which have now led up to this crossroads with new nuclear growth. So I really appreciate this conversation. Do you have any last points or any last thoughts that you'd like to share with the viewers?
Just simply, it's a great time to be in this industry. Opportunities are ours for the taking. We need to work together. Collaboration is key. We're going to have challenges. The better we can anticipate and plan for those challenges, the better off we'll be in the end. But we have an opportunity to change the world, in my opinion. And we're Canadians. We're humble. But I think in this nuclear world, we have a lot to be proud of. And I think we can help a lot of countries achieve some great things. Of course, we need to be successful first here at home, but I'm very optimistic that the future is really bright for us, and the opportunities are just huge.
Wonderful.
I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.